The four things that basically are more challenging to control and how you can limit the risks that these pose on our businesses.
Lending is really important unless you've got pots of cash, maybe newer investors into the industry who tend to kind of overinflate values, a bit too optimistic on their end values, and then get a bit of a shock when the reality check hits from a surveyor giving what is a proper valuation. Getting your numbers right is really, really key at the beginning when you're doing those kinds of projects.
It's a moving feast, right? It changes all the time.
Getting the right lending at the right stage is the key, I think. Paying someone who's professional, who understands the market that you're in is really, really important to get the right lending.
Where you're a little vulnerable as an investor, you can speak to
Building wealth through property isn't about chasing big deals and paydays. It's about owning assets that make money for you consistently. But figuring it all out on your own, that's where most people get stuck. That's why we created this Property Life membership. It's everything we wish we had when we started. Expert guidance, real-world case studies, and a private community of investors actually doing deals, not just talking about them. So you could spend years trying to piece it all together yourself, or you could plug into a system that's already working for our community. Check out our membership page at This Property Life. Everything you need to know is right there. Success is a team sport. Come join in.
Hi, and welcome to This Property Life. I'm Nick Claydon, and I'm here again with Caroline today for part 2 of our 4-step series in how to do kind of bigger lending projects, things that we've learned, the 4 kind of key areas that we are going to talk about, which were planning, building control, lending, and construction. We're not doing them in any particular order.
Yeah. Now, the 4 things that basically are more challenging to control and how you can limit the risks that these pose on our businesses.
Yeah. So today we're going to tackle lending.
Yeah.
Why you need it, if you do need it, and things to look out for. We'll talk about our experiences with some of the projects we've done, some of the good lenders we work with, and some of the maybe not so good ones that we've worked with or managed to avoid, I think, and give you a few kind of things to look out for, so maybe red flags to be aware of and to keep you as safe as possible during, your bigger projects. Lending is really important unless you've got pots of cash. But again, lending is important from a leverage perspective. So we always do like to use lending, but getting the right lending at the right stage is the key, I think.
And that's, where you're a little vulnerable as an investor is you can speak to a fantastic broker, and we'll touch on brokers today. And you're speaking to them about the kind of lending you're going to use to purchase the asset. That's one thing. Then you can speak to them about the lending to renovate the building. And then you can speak to them about the lending at the back end exit. But of course, because of that time lag between purchase and refinance, markets can change. And that is out with our control. It's very challenging. And so that's the little risk element that we need to negate.
Quick heads up before we start the show. If you're serious about buy-to-let investing in 2025, you're going to need to know where to invest. Luckily for you, we've helped countless investors find their goldmine area. And we've put together our free 2025 Buy-to-Let Hotspots Guide. It's packed full of insider tips, market trends, and of course, the top 10 UK rental gold mines. So head to our link in the description below and start investing smart.
Yeah, I think what we've learned, which I think probably didn't appreciate really going in. I mean, when we were doing smaller things, you generally had a initial buy and then a refinance stage. It's generally a two-step process, how we did our buy-to-lets or HMOs. You buy it, generally a type of bridging product maybe, or you might buy on a buy-to-let mortgage, do a light renovation. On our HMOs, It was different. It was a heavy renovation. And then refinance onto your long-term lender, and that's pretty much it. And then you leave it alone. And that's generally the process that we went through.
The only risk on that one was actually, what is the valuation going to be at refinance? What is a surveyor going to come along and say this is now worth? And that then is reflected in the money that you can get back at the end. We've had a couple of scenarios where, well, more than a couple, where surveyors have downvalued or undervalued what we think it was going to be. And then you have another challenge of going to a new lender and starting the whole process again. But they're all fairly minor challenges.
Well, they didn't feel like it at the time.
No, they didn't. And I think lots of our listeners will probably have experienced it as well. And it does feel like it's major at the time, but it is just a delay. It is something that's going to, you're going to get a solution to.
It's something out of your control. You don't really have any control in the residential market. You don't really have any control or minimal control over surveyors. They're going to do what they do. You can try and influence a little bit by make sure you're there and justifying your spend and all of that kind of thing. And also just making sure you've done your numbers correctly in the first place. I come across quite, a lot of maybe newer investors into the industry who tend to kind of overinflate values, a bit too optimistic on their end values, and then get a bit of a shock when the reality check hits from a surveyor giving what is a proper valuation. So getting your numbers right is really, really key at the beginning when you're doing those kinds of projects. Generally, property, I would always say, is really forgiving of mistakes like that. And over the long term, you'll probably be fine. But if you're relying on an exit to pay back an angel, you've got to get your numbers, as accurate as you possibly can. And the other thing I'd say is if that does happen to you, down val on in the resi world, is don't try and fight it. You're unlikely to win. I only know one person that's ever won, and that was because they made a really bad mistake. It's one of our property wealth system mentors, Andrea. She managed to fight one, but that was because it surveyed the wrong address.
Oh, yeah, that's fairly significant. But we had one where it was actually the valuation on purchase. We were buying a property to convert to an HMO, and I think we were buying it for something like 65, 63. And they came back and valued it at something like 40 odd. And so, of course, the lending was like 75% of that. And actually what had happened when we queried it and questioned it was that the surveyors just mixed up the report in the back office. So they'd given us a valuation on a property that wasn't ours.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember that. I obviously blanked that one out. Just filed it under one of the many
traumas that we've now just compartmentalized into forget about that.
Yeah. Lending, in the resi market, obviously you are relying on surveyors. You can't really influence, but the importance we always talk about the importance of having your power team, and that's where your brokers are really important. So if anyone kind of starting out, this is not something you're trying to do on your own. We get a lot of people actually asking about, what buy-to-let mortgage should I use? It's like, well, it depends. The answer is always, it depends on what you're trying to do. And that's why your brokers are really, really important. I think, again, maybe new people into market think they'll save a bit of money by not using a broker. It's a false economy.
Yeah. Definitely don't use a free broker either, right? You want to be paying fees.
Paying someone who's professional, who understands the market that you're in, is really, really important to get the right lending for the right product. There are pitfalls, particularly if you're converting properties into something like an HMO. You've got to have the right lending in place, because if you haven't got a lender that allows you to convert, or if you buy, a property with a buy-to-let lender who doesn't do HMO lending, you've got a problem when you come to refinance. So you've got to make sure you are using the correct lenders when you go into that. I think mainly we're going to focus on what the commercial side and some of our bigger projects that we've done, and the lending challenges that are involved there, because it is a different world.
Well, different beast when it gets into development finance.
So your 2-step process becomes sometimes like a 4-step process, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's many stages to it. It's from purchase to development to then a bricks and mortar valuation and finance, and then a back end MV1 valuation where you get your long-term lending.
So there'll be a lot of lenders out there that are happy to finance the initial purchase on a bridge, okay, but they won't do the development.
Yeah. In fact, the development is actually the piece where your biggest challenge is. So you're in, maybe we should explain the difference between regulated lending and unregulated lending, because that does change the landscape of what you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, your regulated lenders are, your bigger high street banks, the ones that have to adhere to certain rules and regulations about lending practices.
Through FCA.
And that is where you ultimately want to end up.
Yeah.
So
that's the cheaper lending. It's steady. It's, I want to use the word safer.
It's as safe as you get with lending, I would say.
Yeah.
There's always risk with any type of lending, but the safer you're going to be is with the bigger high street type of banks who are regulated. They have to, as I said, adhere to, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but, adhere to particular lending rules about how they lend, who they lend to. So, yeah, generally it's cheaper and more safe, but you won't have to jump through many, many, many hoops, in order to get that type of lending. And they won't lend on anything even remotely risky.
So that's like your final destination. You want to get to one of those regulated lenders because they have to adhere to certain criteria and they're less likely to, frankly, shaft you.
So, and this is something you need to think about right from the very beginning, and you might be going into a project. So if we take our last project at John's Place, we knew who our end lender was going to be.
Yeah.
Before we even bought it, we knew who we wanted to lend with. And I think we can say who it is. That's Handelsbanken, who are they're a big kind of high street, originally Swedish bank, but they have they've expanded all through Europe, and they have a particular model where it's kind of like old school banking, where you have a local manager who actually manages that bank and who they lend to. And it's all about relationships, and they like to know you. And I think it took about a year from initially being introduced into them to actually getting a deal over the line with them. For them get to know us, what our projects were. They wanted to know everything.
Very risk averse.
Very risk averse. But,
and I would say not very dynamic. And that's a bit harsh,
that's
maybe.
A bit harsh.
But,
it's just,
I can't think about bankers as dynamic.
It's just a different type of lending. It's just like, but when you're with them, then you're in and they'll look after you, and it's a long-term relationship. They are interested in that long-term relationship. So it's where we wanted to end up.
The final destination is great, but you have to get there.
But they won't so for example, they will take the asset when it's proven that it's worked. Yeah. That's when they want it. Okay. They don't want it when it's a building site. They definitely don't want it when it's a building site. They don't want it when it hasn't got the right planning use and you're buying an old office building that's going to be a beautiful hotel. Not interested. They're only interested.
They don't even want it once you've finished and opened your doors. They still want you to have had it. Now, technically, they would want you to perform for a minimum of 12 months, ideally 24 months.
They want to know they're lending on something that is as never going to be risk-free, but it's going to be the lowest possible risk. So it's finished, it's open, it's proven its income, track record, then they want it.
So that's a lot of hoops. And it's a lot of time.
Yeah, but the benefit to us is then the rates are much lower. You're on nice kind of 2%, 2.5% above base or whatever you've negotiated. Nice lending rates, someone you can pick up the phone to and have a conversation with and build a longer term relationship with there. So that's the destination.
But the getting there is the rockiest of mountainous terrain that is going to have some pitfalls and some like crazy tigers coming out to jump at you and try and eat you along the way. So let's dissect.
Yeah. On initial purchase, if you're buying something that is going to require planning, change of use, you can't use development lenders because they will only want the building when you have the correct planning designation in place and you're ready to build.
Yeah.
So you have to be buying that building with either cash, yours or someone else's, or bridging finance.
Short term. And here's the dilemma. How long does planning take? Well, that's another episode coming. But generally,
I'll tell you what, let's delay that episode by 18 months just to get into the whole planning mindset, shall we?
Well, it takes about 18 months for planning generally. No, 9 to 12 months, depending on how straightforward the application is, obviously. But 9 to 12 months. So how long do you take your bridge for? Well, most bridges are 12 months anyway. Some are 18 months, but you'll probably pay a higher premium for that. And then, it works out that when you go over on the bridge, they're going to charge you a fee.
And I think this is lesson one, is always, 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 always assume the worst and always get the longest possible bridge that you can. And I would say if you're doing any kind of planning, 18 months is where you want to be, because otherwise you will be paying renewal fees. And if you pick the wrong lender, which is something we'll look at, is if there are really punitive terms, if you go over the bridge, then you could be in real trouble.
What we can talk about on the bridging is how on earth does someone service a bridge when they're just sat there making no money from the asset? So you could choose to take a slightly smaller loan and have that interest rolled up so you don't actually pay any interest on the loan for 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, a lot of lenders will do that. They'll work out all the interest, they'll give you a gross loan amount, they'll roll up the interest and they'll incorporate that into the loan, which means that they withhold it. So the actual amount they release to you will be less. It will be whatever you agreed minus the rolled up interest, which means your LTV is suddenly not 65% or 70%. It's now probably 55 or 60%.
Yeah. So you have to find a bigger deposit.
Yes. So that's something to be aware of going in to that kind of thing. So what it, on the plus side, it means you don't have to finance interest.
Yeah.
On the negative side, you get less. So you need a bigger lump sum to put in the first place.
Yeah. Then you go through the planning process. That's for another day. And then, surprise, surprise, yay, you get it. Let's just assume that you get it. You get that planning, change of use, or whatever it is that you're going to do to add the value. And now that building, just from getting the planning, has a different value. It has a different view as far as the banks and the lenders are concerned. And that's when things change. And it's weird because you've done literally nothing apart from a paper exercise with a bunch of planners.
And depends what you're doing. You can have minimal or massive implications for your valuations. So as an example, when we did Stafford Street, obviously either one of them. So essentially, both buildings that we did were old offices that we then got change of use in Scotland to Class 7, which is kind of hotels and guest houses and all that. So, and what I found interesting there, kind of diving a bit into surveying, but surveyors value things slightly differently because of the way they classify a building. So, for example, in an office building, they don't include all the shared space like toilets and kitchens and things. So the gross internal area, which is the usable internal area of the building, is less. And if they're applying a pounds per square foot valuation, it's a lower value. As soon as it's a hotel, everything is included. So your gross internal area, same building, but the gross internal area is bigger. And they might apply a different pounds per square foot value from an old crappy office to a brand spanking new hotel. So you're getting an uplift for the fact it's going to be a hotel, a change of use for that. And also you've got bigger area. So I think Stafford Street, we bought it.
It was valued at $750, and when we got planning, it was valued at $900.
Yeah, there you go. So not
John's
huge,
place,
but just a nice little uplift.
John's place was valued at $975, and then valued at, was it 1.1?
1.1, yeah.
Little planning gain there, but again, that just helps you get that next stage of lending, which is needing the money to obviously do the development.
But it bumps a bit of equity in. So, you get your uplift, your equity position is a little bit better. So your loan to value is a little bit better. And obviously, if you're doing other types of projects, that planning gain can be quite substantial.
Yeah.
So a piece of raw land,
oh yeah,
for example, that you get planning permission to put housing on, massive uplift, huge uplift, many multiples of uplift. But that planning process might take you 15 years. And I've known that happen. Talking to a friend who had quite a big planning land application going, it's taken over 10 years to get it. Or when you got it, it's massive uplift in the value of the land. But as soon as you get your correct planning for what you're trying to do, then the lending market opens up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you said a little bit, because again, it depends on the timing, depends on what's going on in the economy, depends what appetite everyone's got. And you can start a development. Okay, well, we talk about the different types of finance. So development finance is generally where people would go.
Yeah, this is all assuming you don't have, your own funds to bankroll yourself. Okay, if you have that, brilliant, use that. Yeah. Definitely use that if you have your own money.
We never ever say use your own money, but in this case, when it comes to development,
definitely do.
Yeah.
Because this lending at this level is really expensive, does come with risk. So 100%, if you've got your own money, do that. And the next best after your own money, I would say, is private lending. So this is high net worth individuals or somebody that is going to bankroll you. And obviously you can set the terms and you can discuss and set the terms that you're both happy with, and make sure that you have proper legal representation to make sure that your private lender isn't a lend-to-own lender.
Right, we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that.
Let's just not freak everyone out.
No, I know.
Right now.
I've got to say it. But yeah, okay. So, private lending is the next best.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then after that, you are looking at development finance, which is for us now, like the lenders of last resort.
Yeah, I would not. Look, I know loads and loads and loads of our contemporaries who use development finance. We just never will. And look, we were hours away from development lending on a number of projects. And I thank the universe that fell through for whatever reason. And it was so frustrating at the time, but actually it was a blessing in disguise. So how development finance works is they come along, they take out the initial bridge that you use to buy. They'll also then give you an amount for the construction that you can draw down throughout the process of your development. And how that's managed is the bank needs a quantity surveyor to come and survey the construction throughout. And you can only draw down what the bank's quantity surveyor says the amount of work has been done. So you're drawing down throughout the process until you're at the end of the construction period and your funds have all been used up. And then they look for you to obviously exit them with a long-term lender once you're finished. So that's kind of what development finance is. They give you that initial lump sum to clear the purchase bridge, and then the fund that you can dip into.
Okay, so question might be, what's a QS and what do they do?
The joke is that they count bricks, but what they do is they come onto a construction site, they survey how much of the construction project has been carried out, they put quantities to that and a value to it, and then that's the amount of money that needs to be paid to the builder.
So generally speaking, the bank would have their own QS that you need to pay for. They won't pay that. You pay for
and
that.
that will be roughly speaking over £1,000 per visit.
Yeah. And then you also should have your own QS that was on your side that does the same.
Yeah. And then that will be obviously over £1,000 a visit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So development finance can get very expensive very quickly.
Yep.
Which is why you need to read the terms very, very, very carefully and make sure you know what you're paying for, which is generally everything. You'll pay their legals, you'll pay their QS fees, all of it, any of it is all on you to pay. So you might look at an initial headline rate and think, oh, that's not too bad. 1% a month, it's not too bad. But when you actually factor in all the other things you have to pay,
it starts
expensive.
to mount. It gets very ugly. Now,
however, if you need the money, they have it and you can get your project done.
Yeah. And if it works as I've just described it, fantastic. However, I am yet to hear a project that works smoothly to plan like that. Because during the course of your project, because these guys are unregulated lenders, or code the cowboys in the industry, I have heard them being called. I'm not saying that. That's somebody else calling them that.
Because they're unregulated doesn't mean they're cowboys. It just means they don't have to adhere to strict lending rules and criteria that regulated lenders do.
I know how you're like keeping me in check here, but we have.
I don't want to get sued. Don't sue us, please.
But we have heard the terminology of unregulated lending being like the Wild West.
Wild West, yes.
Yeah, Wild West, because they make up the rules as they go along. They can change things. And that's a big risk to you because it depends on their mood and the appetite at the time.
And I think, particularly new investing can be a little bit naive and going into things, thinking that everyone's out to help you. And, sometimes that is the case. Often it isn't. Obviously, these businesses are there to make money and they, will want their pound of flesh from you. But you've got to be really, really careful. The lender that you're going to work with on development finance lending has reputation, is not totally new. What am I trying to do? I'm kind of beating around the bush here.
You're trying to be you're trying to be so diplomatic.
I know I am. All right. Look, what you've got to be worried about is kind of a practice of what's called kind of lend to own. Okay. Which is where a lender might, look on the surface, we want to lend to you, but they put such onerous terms in that make it almost impossible for you to complete the project unless you complete the project absolutely exactly on time. You don't miss any payments or anything else like that. They can swoop in and they can appoint receivers and essentially buy back your asset at a cheaper rate. You lose all your equity and you're out, and they've got the asset. Does it happen? Yeah, it does. But can you put yourself? Yes, you can. But there are, maybe a few red flags to look for. And we had it. I'm not going to name the lender. Don't name the lender.
I won't. DM me for details.
But yeah, look, we had one where we were about Stuff Street, one of our we had one bank that for like 3 months. Yeah. We're going to do it. And then literally 2 days before or 3 days before we're supposed to complete, oh, actually our appetite's changed and we're not going to do it anymore. Right. Okay.
And the builder was literally about to start. So we went right back to the beginning with a new lender. And we got to the stage through credit. Everything was great. We're thinking, fantastic, we've solved this problem again. We got to the stage where they said, great, send us $4,000 for the legal fees because we're transacting. And we actually asked the question, can we pay the legal fees on credit card? Because we thought, well, we've got payment protection then. And while the broker was going away asking all that question, what this lender wanted was a Zoom call with us because they wanted to meet all the people that they were lending to. So there was like this tick box exercise, get on a Zoom. And the Zoom was meant to be later on that afternoon. And we were about to send this £4,000 for legals. And then it all went a bit quiet. We thought, that's a bit weird. And I thought, well, we're not sending any money just now. But we had the link, we had everything there. And then it was about 4 hours later, the broker phoned and said they are a little bit worried about their amount of security. So they will still do the deal, but only if they get a second charge over your house as additional security.
Now, they were worried about, I think going back to time, they were worried about, there was it was not a lot. It was like, it worked out to be about 20, 30 grand's worth of equity that they were like, oh, we're a bit under, right? And they said, so well, to do this, we want the second charge on your house. Now, I'd say, our house is, we've got a nice house and it's got quite a lot of equity in it. I'm talking, nice chunk of equity in it. And they wanted that second charge. And that was a major red flag. It was like, hang on a minute. We are now suddenly, if we did that, we're like all in with that lender.
Yeah.
For the sake of like 20 grand, they want
a second charge on our house
over all our equity on our house. It's like, now at that point, we were literally about to do that deal.
Yeah.
And we were under real pressure because the builder was like starting or had started.
So I remember this so clearly because it was actually your birthday. So beginning of March, and the builder was starting in March. So we couldn't have been closer to 11th hour if we tried.
And I think they knew we were under pressure, and it would have been really easy to just go, yeah, all right, okay, let's do it. But there was red flags. We looked at it and went, we are not risking our house here. I don't want to be all in on this lender.
That was a real red flag. And then actually, because we said, no, screw that, we're not doing that, that's ridiculous. It turned out the broker, dug a little deeper because the broker was raging. I mean, he was about to get a lovely big chunky commission that was suddenly now off the table. That they'd had a few other developments that had gone a bit south, hadn't really performed very well. So they were looking to claw back with new ones that were coming in through the door. And we were the new ones coming through the door. So these guys look at their balance sheet as a whole, and anywhere there's little holes or black marks on it, they're going to try and overcompensate elsewhere. And so thank the Lord we didn't go for that, because
as I said, it would have been really easy to just go, all right, screw it, we have to do it. I mean, and I think, and that's the thing, they knew that, and that was it was a real red flag. See, sometimes you have to recognize a red flag and go, look, I'm that doesn't matter position we're in, we are not doing that. That was too much risk for us, and so we said no. And if we'd paid that $4,000 over to legals, that's gone.
That's gone. Thank God we didn't pay the $4,000 legals.
Yeah, we almost did, and it was like that's gone. That's gone. We wouldn't get that back.
Which is unbelievably unfair, right? Unbelievably unfair.
One of our friends doing another development with that lender.
Yes.
And and this is where you've got to be wary about the covenants and clauses within that lending. They sent their QS in for a payment, and the QS noticed something he wasn't particularly happy with.
Well, it was something really straightforward.
Minor.
Right? So the planning was the planning. And of course, we all know that the drawings on your planning sometimes have to change when you actually start your construction. So you might put a door somewhere in your drawings, but then on a practical level, when you're knocking the place apart, the door can't go there. The door needs to go somewhere else. This QS came along and said, that door should not be there. You're in breach of your covenants of your lending. And the lender turned around and said, we're recalling our loan. You've got 3 weeks to pay it back. Now, that is way more common than the lend to own thing.
Yeah, well, but some would argue that is lend to own, because who can refinance in 3 weeks, right? I mean, that's not enough time. Sometimes they could say, you might read your covenant, and if you haven't read it properly, it might say 48 hours, right? Now, that could happen. So that's why you got to read it all, because if they could turn around and go, you got 48 hours, they know that you have got zero chance of refinancing that in 48 hours. No chance at all. 3 weeks is also really, really difficult, really tough. That's almost impossible to do 3 weeks. So even then, I'd be calling them out and going, that's a lend to own practice, because 3 weeks is not enough time.
Yeah, but you're not allowed to stand on when it's lend to own. You can't, shouting that's
no,
lend to own.
you can't, but it is, and we could name that lender. I'm not going to, but we could, and that could be out there, because I think that is, he was under like already massive pressure, and that just added it on. And his only way out was private lending, and he managed to get it. That was it. There was no way another development lender was going to come in time, because it's a 12-week process.
But not only that, what lender wants to take on a project that's half done? You're even more vulnerable when you're halfway through than before you've even started.
So that's why I'm calling that as lend to own, because they would have known 3 weeks is not enough time. And he was, luckily we had loads of contacts, and we managed to find him a private lender. He came in and took it.
So this Wild West that we're talking about, it really is the Wild West, and they can look for something in the covenants or something that is going to trip you up deliberately because it suits them, it serves them. That project, the door being in a different place or whatever, it was absolutely going fine. But again, probably because they had other loans go south, toxic debt from somewhere else, he's the one that's going to suffer.
But that's the thing to look for. So your lawyer should be flagging up any kind of harsh default triggers in the lending docs. Anything that says anything like any minor breach, if you're 1 day late paying the interest, that could trigger default. If you're if it's a 12-month bridge or 12-month product and you're 1 day over, does that trigger default? Having said all of that, there's loads of lenders out there that are really flexible and nice to work with, and just got to find them and not.
I was going to say, who are they?
I'm going to say the lenders we're with currently.
No, I know. The lenders you're with right now are amazing. But I tell you, they're not ones that you will have heard of. They're not high street. You have to dig really, really deep and network like hell to find them.
And I'm going to say actually, whilst we say, brokers are really super important, they are. All our current lending has come through personal contacts.
Yeah, networking with people who are in the industry that are like 10 years ahead of us. Friends of friends of friends of friends.
It's like, go to these guys. I'll connect you with this guy.
And works really, really well. I mean, John's Place, we had a scenario where we were with a particular lender. They'd lent on other projects. They'd worked really well. We loved working with them. And this is the thing, right? It's the same with builders. They're great until they're not great. Banks are the same. They're great until they're not great. They can change like the weather.
And they did, they were great, and then suddenly they changed their lending terms, and they went from being great to suddenly not great.
Yeah, the lending criteria changed because suddenly they were governed by a different bank. Because again, banks take over other banks, and then their lending criteria is imposed on the smaller bank, and then the smaller bank who you potentially are with are now like, sorry, we can't help you now.
That's an uncontrollable from our perspective. There was no way of us controlling that process, which is why, again, we have to, as soon as that happened, we were like, okay, now we need to get out of this.
Yeah that was a particularly complex structure of finance, though, which we don't need to go into now. And we had so many different assets with so many different levels of security. And they'd said all along, yeah, we'll give you the lending to do John's Place development, no bother. You've done it before, yada, yada. We did the valuation. That came back really well. Everything was fine. The builder had started. We'd started paying the builder. So we were 2-3 months in. And then we got a call on the 20th of December at 10:30. It's etched into my brain. And they were like, oh, we can't give you any more. That's it. Once you use this last 100 grand, you're done. It was like, oh, Merry Christmas. That was a really, really challenging phone call to get. And again, it was because lending criteria, they had no control. They were like, oh, our personal reputations is on this. We will do whatever it takes. They're still going to get their salary at the end of the month and they'll get new clients that they can lend to. You are on your own with this. And it's about getting out there, speaking to as many people as you possibly can to find out who can we get on board quickly that's going to serve us and take these guys out of the equation. We completed the new deal within 3 months. So the 27th of March was the deadline, because if we hadn't completed then, this existing lender would have charged us another 30 grand to stay with them.
Which originally they said they wouldn't do.
Yeah. And of course, they said they wouldn't, but...
It's in the terms and they can.
Yeah, they can basically do what the hell they want.
So super important to read the terms yourself and get your solicitor to read them and flag up anything that they think is onerous or a red flag. There was another lender we were talking to who at that time who talked a good game. And I remember we spoke to your brother, who is a banking lawyer, and his words were, sounds like lend to own. You were like, yeah, okay, probably does actually. And so he, advised not to do that. And it was that again would have been easy to do.
That was the easiest option we had, the quickest and the easiest. And again, the broker was really pushing for that. But sometimes your best option is not actually the easiest and the quickest. So yeah, we kept speaking to new people. And actually, we were so far down the line with this lend-to-own lender before we knew the red flags were there. And we met up with another potential lender and we said, look, we're pretty much sorted, but this is our situation. He was like, yeah, we could probably do that. And I said, well, you need to do it by the 27th of March. And this was like the end of January. And he was like, yeah, we can maybe do that. We're like, okay, let's look at that option then. So then we had a comparison from the guys who were quick, easy, straightforward, but high risk, to these guys here. And the only difference, if we went with the new guys, was we'd have to separately finance another 2 or 3 elements of our business.
Those 3 lenders all had to come together to complete on one day.
So that's the hardest.
That was the hardest by far.
Most complicated. But actually, it's the safest if you think about diversifying. From with 3 different lenders, suddenly we've just minimized our risk. If we're all in with one, they've got us by the short and curlies.
Exactly. And after that, at the end of March, we looked at each other and we said, we are never going all in on one lender, ever. We never meant to in the first place. It just kind of transpired that that's what happened. And we said, never again. Because if all your key assets are with one lender, they own you. And these guys did. So they were really nice about it, but they did own us. And if something had gone wrong or their terms had changed, which they did in December, and if they'd changed again, like with not charging fees and then suddenly charging fees, and if their default had changed to, instant default, they would have owned us. And they've spent 20 years building up. So
yeah, and we kind of heard through the grapevine that we were their biggest client. They wanted to keep us, and they even told the brokers not to do any work for us, as in don't find any other lending. Which the minute I heard that, I was like, that's like the biggest red flag going. They want to keep us so bad that, like, nah, we need to get away as quickly as possible. So, development finance, would I use it? In all honesty, no, I wouldn't. Not for the big stuff. For smallish, relatively straightforward things, let's say sub 100 grand, I probably.
But I think caveat maybe saying, look, if you're a little bit more advanced and you've got everything very much separated and siloed, right? Which is kind of where we are now, in that, each asset's in its own company. Our structure is very clean, but it was messy before, and therefore we had to bring other elements in, and that's when you got in a position where you had one bank or that owned more than one thing. Now we're just like, look, one lender, one building, one company. That's how we are. So your risk is limited to that building, that project, that company, and it doesn't affect.
I love how you're saying this, but we've just like gone all in with, well, we will be with handles.
No, but it'll be separated because it's each, but they're also they're regulated.
Oh yeah, they're regulated. Right. Yeah.
It's a regulated lender. B, every asset is separated off. So they are individual.
I know. Trust no one. That's my Scottish default. Trust no one.
What was the other one? Oh, yeah, always tie up your camels or something.
So lending, what do we say about this? I think it's a moving feast, right? It changes all the time. Appetites. So one of the development lenders we were quite far down the road with, they suddenly turned around and said, our appetite to lend in Scotland's gone overnight. Okay, that's nice. So you know what it's like, you guys out there, our listeners who use buy-to-lets. You use different buy-to-let products all the time because their conditions can change or their criteria changes. One minute they'll lend to you, the next minute they won't.
Just appreciate that whenever you've got a lender, particularly a short-term lender in the mix, you're at risk until you are financed away to a long-term lender, regulated lender. Then you're still at a bit of risk. Any lending has that, but much less. It's much reduced. But while you're out there with short-term lending that you need to exit out of, you are at risk until you exit out of that. So for us, we always start, we're never going to anything without knowing who the exit lender is. Getting to that point is the fight. But you kind of like, you breathe once you've financed out with your exit lender that you like.
It's like crossing the channel, right? You jump into the water and you know that swim is going to be treacherous. You might get chomped by a shark. You might get stung by a jellyfish. You might get cramped. You're going to get exhaustion, but you can see the dry land. You know where you're headed. But boy, oh boy, getting there is
it's a fight.
A challenge.
It's a fight, and you have to be up for the fight and understand that that's what it is. But your exit point is that's when you breathe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think resilience is the word that I always come back to. Is, boy, you've got to be resilient in this business.
Yeah, look, and there's a lot of lenders that will say, yeah, well, look, we want to help, we want to do this, and yes, they do want to help, but they're a business, and they have their terms, and that you have to take your responsibility that it is your project, and you have to own it, and you have to fight hard to get to the point where you can breathe. I think that's the thing. So, make sure you have the right lending in place for what you're doing. Use a good broker at the beginning. Use your own personal contacts to get those right lenders. Beware of the red flags.
Yeah.
If something feels wrong, probably is. And if you're under pressure, that's sometimes when you can make these mistakes.
Yeah.
Because
you're more vulnerable. Yeah,
it's
you're
easier.
more vulnerable.
It's like, I'll just do it, and but sometimes you got to say no and then dig deep and find another answer. But look, you can't do this without them unless you have your own pots of cash, or someone that will fund you that is that, where you can create your own terms around it. And we have used private lenders like that we really like.
They've worked really, really well for us. And then, of course, the next level beyond this would be going private equity and saying, okay, if you want to really scale your business, let's say that Nick and I decided that we wanted to do another 10 hotels in the next 5 years. Doing it the way that we've done, it's going to slow us down. Doing 10 in 5 years is going to be unmanageable. But if you get a private equity level of investors on board, they just fund everything, right? They fund the whole shebang, but they're going to take 55% of your business, right? Do you want to scale and grow on epic proportions?
Well, it's basically, do you want to own 100% of a smaller thing or 25, 30, 40% of a bigger thing? That's the choice. And for us, at our stage of life,
Yeah, I mean, if we'd started,
Yeah, if we were 20 years younger, I'd say, yeah, maybe we're in that, like, hey, let's go for it. But I think where we're at is like, let's just chill out a bit.
yeah, let's just chill out and be lazy for a bit. That sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah. So the uncontrollables, they get a little bit more, well, I want to say hairier the more experience that you get, but actually the bigger the reward, the bigger the problems.
But I think you just forget. I think if we rewind 10 years and we were doing like the HMOs in Birmingham, there was problems there, getting down valued, and there's construction problems, and they felt massive at the time, and they were massive at the time. And the stress is the same. It's just the stage that you're at, so we can look back and go, oh, yeah, that was nothing compared to what we've done with now, but it wasn't nothing. It was still stressful.
Yeah. I mean, the alternative is just stay in your job, right? And then deal with a boss that you don't like and just get your paycheck.
Where's the fun in
month
that?
in, month out. But where's the fun in that? Nah. Let's go with no regrets, right?
Yeah, right. So I think we've kind of done lending. Anyone want to connect with us and find out a bit more about that, then obviously do connect with us. We're at thispropertylive.co.uk. Come and find us. We have networking events where you come meet us. So go and check out our website and you'll see when our next one is coming up.
Give me a wee follow on Instagram, carolineclayton.property. You can DM me and I'll tell you all the names of those lenders we're not allowed to talk about.
Don't get sued. Great. Okay, so the next one, I think, we're going to decide whether we want to tackle planning or whether we're going to tackle construction.
And to be honest, between building control and lending, which we've now covered, I think we have saved the worst to last. Planning and construction. Oh,
do you know what? I'm going to do planning last.
Nah, I think construction last.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll flip a coin. We'll tell you which one.
Yeah.
It'll be a surprise. Okay, so keep a
Yes.
lookout for the next episode, and we'll see you all very soon.
See you next time.